We had just closed the biggest case of our careers, celebrating a quiet victory in our favorite bar. We had no idea the real fight was about to begin, not with criminals, but with the very badge we swore to uphold. The scent of old wood, spilled whiskey, and quiet victory hung in the air. My brother Marcus clinked his glass against mine, the sound a sharp, satisfying chime in the low hum of the kindled spirit, our favorite dive bar. A genuine, unrestrained smile stretched across his face, a mirror of my own. We were identical, down to the small scar above our left eyebrows from a childhood misadventure with a treehouse. But his smile was always a little wider, a little more brilliant. It was the smile of a man who could talk his way into or out of anything. Mine was the smile of a man who watched him do it. "To closing the book on the Donovan case," he said, his voice a low rumble that still managed to cut through the bar's murmur. "May he and his associates enjoy the next 25 to life in a cell with no windows." "I'll drink to that," I replied, taking a long, slow sip of the smoky single malt. The liquid fire slid down my throat, a welcome burn that seemed to wash away the last 6 months of sleepless nights, cold coffee, and the constant grinding pressure of the job. The Donovan case had been a monster, a sprawling web of trafficking and corruption that had consumed our lives. But we'd done it. We'd untangled the web, presented an airtight case, and this morning the jury had delivered the verdict. Guilty on all counts. For the first time in half a year, we were just two brothers having a drink. Not agents. Not the guys with the weight of a dozen ruined lives on their shoulders. Just Mike and Marcus celebrating a win. The bar was our sanctuary. It was dimly lit, filled with regulars who kept to themselves, and the bartender, a grizzled old man named Sal, knew our order before we even sat down. It was comfortably anonymous. We were just two black men in well-tailored but unassuming suits, unwinding after a long week. No one here knew we carried badges, the kind that didn't come from a local precinct. No one knew that our long week involved kicking down doors and staring into the abyss of human depravity. And that's exactly how we liked it. We were on our second round, laughing about a rookie agent back at the field office who'd managed to lock himself in the evidence room, when the vibe in the bar shifted. It was subtle at first, like a change in air pressure before a storm. The jovial noise level dipped by a few decibels. Heads that had been bowed over drinks lifted slightly. The front door had swung open, and framed in the doorway were two uniformed police officers. This wasn't unusual. Cops did walkthroughs all the time, especially on a Friday night. But there was something different about these two. The older one had a face like a clenched fist, all hard lines and a drooping mustache that looked like it had given up years ago. The younger one walked with a swagger that didn't fit the uniform. His hand rested habitually on the butt of his service weapon, and his eyes swept the room, not with the practiced gaze of a professional ensuring public safety, but with the predatory scan of a bully looking for a target. Marcus, deep in his story, didn't notice them, but I did. My training kicked in instinctively. I clocked their posture, their gear, the way the younger one's eyes lingered a little too long on the two women laughing at a corner table. I made a mental note and then tried to dismiss it. We were off the clock. This wasn't our jurisdiction, and it wasn't our problem. I turned back to my brother, trying to recapture the relaxed mood, but the younger cop's eyes kept sweeping, and eventually they landed on us. And they stayed there. He nudged his partner, a jerk of his chin in our direction. The older cop glanced over, his expression unreadable, but tinged with a weary sort of disdain. They exchanged a few quiet words, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Marcus finally caught my gaze and saw the shift in my demeanor. "What's up?" he murmured, his smile fading. He didn't turn around. He didn't have to. We'd worked together long enough to communicate with a single look. "Company," I said quietly, taking another sip of my drink, keeping my movements slow and deliberate. 6 o'clock. Uniforms. One of them seems to have found his new favorite TV show." Marcus let out a barely audible sigh. "Let me guess. Young guy. Looks like he peaked in high school? You know the type." We both knew the type. We'd dealt with them our whole lives, long before we ever pinned on a badge of our own. The ones who got into law enforcement for the power, not the service. The ones who saw two well-dressed black men in a decent bar and immediately saw a problem that needed solving. For a few minutes nothing happened. They stood by the entrance making a show of observing, but their attention kept snapping back to us. It was a palpable weight, an accusation just waiting to be spoken. The other patrons felt it too. Conversations became more muted. The easy atmosphere of the bar was curdling. Then they started to move, not towards the door to leave, but deeper into the bar. They walked past a table of college kids, past a couple on a date, their path a straight line directly for our 2 stools at the corner of the bar. My whole body tensed. My hand, resting on my knee, was inches from my own firearm, concealed perfectly by the cut of my jacket. I ran through the protocols in my head: de-escalate, comply, announce. But the sheer, unadulterated injustice of the situation was a hot coal in my stomach. Here, in our one safe place, on our one night off, we were about to be treated like criminals by 2 patrolmen who probably couldn't pass the FBI's entrance exam if they were spotted the answers. They stopped right behind Marcus. The younger one, whose name tag I could now read as Davis, leaned in close, his voice a stage whisper that carried through the entire bar. "Funny. We got a call about 2 guys fitting your description causing trouble in the area." Marcus didn't turn. He just lifted his glass to his lips. "Is that so?" "Well, as you can see, officer, the only thing we're causing trouble for is this fine scotch." The older cop, Miller, stepped forward. "He asked you a question. You got some ID?" This was it. The classic pretext. The demand that was less a request and more a challenge. The air crackled. I could feel every eye in the room on us. Marcus placed his glass down on the bar with a soft, deliberate click. Every instinct I had was screaming. I knew, with absolute certainty, that showing them our government credentials right now would be like throwing gasoline on a fire. To them, it would look like a fake, a provocation. I decided to try and defuse it. I turned slowly on my stool, giving them a calm, non-threatening look. "Officers, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We've just been sitting here having a quiet drink." Davis smirked, a truly ugly expression. "That's what they all say. Now let's see some ID. And how about you both stand up? Nice and slow. Put your hands on the bar where I can see them." The humiliation was the point, the public display of dominance. Marcus finally turned, his face a mask of cold fury, the easygoing charm completely gone, replaced by the hardened agent I knew so well. He looked from Davis to Miller, then back again. He didn't move. "We're not going to do that," Marcus said, his voice dangerously low. Davis's smirk vanished. "Excuse me? That wasn't a request." He took a step closer, his hand dropping from his belt to his side. His thumb flicked the retention strap on his holster. It was a small sound, a tiny click of plastic, but in the sudden silence of the bar, it was as loud as a gunshot. And my brain, the part of it that had been trained for years at Quantico to analyze threats, started running 100 different calculations at once. But they all ended in the same 2 outcomes: compliance and humiliation, or something far, far worse. Time seemed to stretch and distort, each second dripping away with agonizing slowness. The click of that holster strap echoed in the bone-deep silence of the bar. It was a declaration, a line drawn in the sand. Davis wanted this to escalate. He was itching for it. I could see it in the slight tremor of his hand, the predatory glint in his eyes. He wasn't a peacekeeper. He was a hunter who had cornered his prey. I flicked my eyes to my brother. Marcus was a statue carved from rage. His shoulders were squared, his jaw was a knot of tension, and his gaze was locked on Davis with an intensity that could melt steel. I knew that look. It was the same look he got just before a raid, the moment when all the planning and surveillance culminated in a single point of violent entry. He was seconds away from reacting, from meeting this cop's thuggish aggression with a decade's worth of training in close-quarters combat. And while I had no doubt he could put Davis on the floor before he could even clear his weapon, I also knew it would be the end of our careers. Maybe more. "You must be hard of hearing," Davis sneered, taking another half-step forward, invading our personal space. His partner Miller shifted his weight, his hand now also resting on his firearm. They were bracketing us, cutting off any easy path of retreat. I said stand up, Hands on the bar. Now. I had to intervene. I had to be the voice of reason, the cool head that had pulled us back from the brink a dozen times before. I raised my hands slowly, palms open and visible, a universal sign of non-aggression. All right, I said, my voice calm and steady, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through my veins. There's no need for this. Let's all just take a breath. I turned my head slightly towards Marcus, never taking my eyes completely off the cops. Mark, let it go. I said it quietly, but with a force that I hoped he'd understand. It was a plea and an order rolled into one. Don't let this bastard win. Not like this. For a moment he didn't respond. The standoff held, a fragile bubble of tension that threatened to burst. Then I saw his shoulders relax by a fraction of an inch. He gave a short, sharp exhale through his nose. He was still furious, but he was listening. He was back with me. Okay, officers, I said, directing my words to Miller, the older cop. He seemed more grounded, less high on his own authority. No problem. We'll show you our ID, but you're going to have to relax. We're not looking for any trouble. Davis scoffed. You'll do what we tell you, when we tell you. You lost the privilege of dictating terms when you decided to be a mouthy piece of trash. The insult washed over me. It was textbook provocation. He wanted a reaction. He was desperate for one. It was the only justification he could invent for what he was doing. I refused to give it to him. I'm reaching into my jacket now, I stated clearly, my eyes locked on his. Inside my left breast pocket. I'm going for my wallet, which contains my identification. I moved with the exaggerated slowness of someone handling a bomb. Every person in the bar was frozen, watching the drama unfold. I could see a phone or two being discreetly raised in the reflection of the mirror behind the bar. Good. Witnesses. I pulled out my wallet. It wasn't my personal one. It was the one I carried on duty. Black leather, worn at the edges. I flipped it open, not to my driver's license, but to the inset gold badge and my credentials. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent Michael Johnson. My face stared out from the photo. Younger, cleaner, but unmistakably me. My brother is going to do the same, I said, keeping my wallet open and visible. Marcus, with a look of pure disgust on his face, mirrored my actions. He produced his own credentials, identical to mine. Special Agent Marcus Johnson. We held them out. For the first time since they approached us, the cops were silent. Davis's smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. Miller's eyes narrowed as he peered at my ID, then at Marcus's. The entire dynamic in the room had just been tilted on its axis. This was the moment of truth. The moment they would realize their catastrophic error in judgment, offer a mumbled apology, and back out of the bar with their tails between their legs. At least that's what was supposed to happen. Davis leaned in, squinting at my credentials. He looked from the photo to my face, then back again. A strange smile crept onto his lips. It wasn't a smile of recognition or deference. It was a smile of disbelief and ridicule. He let out a short, sharp laugh, a bark of contempt. He looked at his partner. Miller, you seeing this? These clowns think they're G-men. My blood ran cold. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Davis snatched the credential wallet from my hand. He held it up to the dim bar light, turning it over as if it were a cheap prop from a movie set. Wow, this is a pretty good fake. Almost looks real. Where'd you get it? One of those novelty shops online? My mind was reeling, struggling to process the turn of events. He didn't believe us. He thought we were not just liars, but felons stupid enough to impersonate federal agents to his face. The situation had just gone from a gross abuse of power to something infinitely more dangerous. Officer, I said, my voice dangerously tight. That is official government property. I suggest you give it back to me, right now. Davis's mocking smile widened into a full-blown grin. He was loving this. He had taken our trump card and turned it into a weapon against us. Or what? You're gonna Federal Bureau of Investigate me? He tossed my credentials to Miller, who caught them clumsily. They're impersonating federal officers, Miller. That's a big one, a real big one. He turned back to us, his eyes shining with a sick kind of glee. The swagger was back, 10 times stronger than before. He had found his justification, the one he'd been searching for all along. He wasn't just hassling two black guys anymore. He was taking down two dangerous criminals. In his mind, he was a hero. He unclipped his handcuffs from his belt, the metal links jingling ominously in the silent room. "You two are under arrest for felony impersonation of a federal officer," he announced, his voice booming with newfound authority. "Turn around. Put your hands behind your back. Now." The metallic jingle of the handcuffs was a sound of finality. It was the sound of a closing door, a conversation ending, a situation spiraling into a freefall with no bottom in sight. My mind, usually a well-oiled machine of tactical analysis and calm logic, was screaming. Every protocol, every rule of engagement was being shredded by the sheer pig-headed ignorance of the man in front of me. "Officer Davis," I said, forcing my voice to remain level, a desperate attempt to anchor us to reality. "You are making a monumental mistake. I'm telling you right now to take a step back and think about what you're doing." Marcus was past words. He let out a low, guttural sound of disbelief. "You have got to be kidding me." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of utter bewilderment at the absurdity of it all. He was looking at Davis like he was a specimen under a microscope, a fascinating but repulsive new form of life. Davis seemed to feed on our incredulity. It was fuel for his fire. "The only mistake here was you two thinking you could pull a fast one on me," he shot back, jangling the cuffs again for emphasis. "Now, I'm not going to tell you again. Turn around." His partner, Miller, was looking uneasy. He held our credentials in his hand, flipping them back and forth. His brow was furrowed. He wasn't as convinced as his hot-headed partner. He was an older cop. He'd likely seen more, and some part of his cop brain had to be screaming that something was wrong with this picture. Two men in tailored suits, drinking expensive scotch, who were calm, articulate, and carrying ID that, even if fake, was of exceptionally high quality. It didn't fit the profile of your average street-level impersonator. "Davis," Miller said, his voice a low grumble, "maybe we should run these." He gestured with our credentials. Just to be sure. It was a lifeline, a small branch of sanity to grab onto in the middle of this hurricane of stupidity. All they had to do was call it in. One quick radio call to dispatch, who would patch it through to the federal liaison, and this whole nightmare would be over in less than 5 minutes. But Davis wasn't having it. He shot his partner a look of pure venom. "Be sure of what, Miller? That these thugs are lying?" "I'm sure. Look at them." He waved a dismissive hand in our direction. "They think 'cause they got a nice suit they can play cop. It's an insult to the badge. Your badge and my badge." He puffed out his chest, a self-righteous warrior defending the honor of his tribe. He was past the point of no return. His ego was so wrapped up in this confrontation that backing down now was impossible for him. He had to be right. He had to be the hero who unmasked the dastardly criminals. "That's it. I'm done asking." He lunged forward, grabbing Marcus by the arm. And that was the moment everything changed. The instant Davis's hand touched my brother, it was like a switch was flipped. Marcus, who had been holding himself in check with a discipline forged over thousands of hours of training, moved with a speed that was nothing short of explosive. It wasn't an attack, it was a response, a perfectly executed defensive maneuver. He twisted his body, using Davis's own momentum against him. In one fluid motion, he broke the cop's grip, spun him around, and slammed him face first against the polished surface of the bar. A collective gasp went through the room. Davis's head connected with the wood with a dull thud, and the handcuffs clattered to the floor. It was over in less than a second. A textbook disarm and control technique, executed flawlessly. Marcus had Davis pinned, one arm locked behind his back, his face pressed into the bar, right next to our half-empty glasses of scotch. Miller, seeing his partner neutralized, reacted instantly. "Police! Get on the ground!" he bellowed, his voice cracking with adrenaline. He dropped our credentials, and his hand went to his holster, fumbling to draw his weapon. This was the point of no return. This was the moment that flashes on the news. 2 men assault police officers. The narrative was writing itself. "Federal agent!" I yelled, my voice a thunderclap that cut through the panic. I didn't move towards Miller. I didn't make a single aggressive motion. I just stood my ground, my hands still raised and open. That officer initiated an unlawful assault. My partner defended himself. Miller's gun was out now, leveled at my chest. His hands were shaking. In his eyes I saw not malice, but fear. His partner was down, and two men he believed were criminals were standing their ground. He was a cornered animal. "Let him go," Miller shouted, his voice trembling. "Let my partner go right now, or I'll shoot." The red dot of a laser sight would have been less terrifying than the wavering iron sights of that trembling Glock. A scared cop with a gun is the most dangerous thing on the planet. "Marcus, ease up," I commanded, my voice strained. "Let him up, slowly." Marcus was breathing heavily, his chest heaving with adrenaline and fury. "He put his hands on me, Mike." "I know," I said, my eyes locked on the barrel of Miller's gun. "And now you're going to let him go." "That's an order, Agent Johnson." Using his title was a calculated risk. It could either snap him back into a federal mindset or enrage the cop pointing a gun at me even further. Thankfully, it worked. Marcus grunted, a sound of reluctant compliance, and slowly released his grip. Davis stumbled back from the bar, dazed and disoriented. A thin trickle of blood ran from his forehead where he'd hit the wood. The moment he was free, his shock morphed into pure, unadulterated rage. His face was a mask of crimson fury. "You're dead," he hissed, spitting a fleck of blood onto the floor. "You are both dead." He scrambled for his gun, his hands shaking so violently he could barely get a grip. "Don't!" Miller yelled. Not at us, but at his own partner. "Davis, stand down. Calm down." But Davis wasn't listening. He was in his own world of vengeance. He finally got his gun out of the holster and brought it up, pointing it directly at Marcus's head. "I'm going to kill you for that." The entire bar seemed to vanish. The sounds, the smells, the other people, it all faded into a gray background. All that existed was the muzzle of that gun, Officer Davis's hate-filled eyes, and my brother standing just feet away from it. My own weapon was still in its holster. Drawing it now would be suicide. Miller was still covering me. If I moved, he'd shoot. If I didn't, Davis would shoot Marcus. We were in an impossible, fatal triangle. Then behind the two cops I saw a movement. Sal, the old bartender, had been slowly, imperceptibly, reaching for something under the counter. His face was pale, his hands were steady. He wasn't reaching for a phone. He was reaching for the sawed-off shotgun he kept for just such an occasion. He was a civilian, an old man about to step into a crossfire between what he thought were two cops and two criminals. He was about to get us all killed. I had to end this. Right now. "Dispatch, this is Special Agent Johnson," I shouted, my voice projecting to every corner of the room, hoping Miller's shoulder mic was keyed up. "Badge number 734. We have two officers threatening federal agents with deadly force at the Kindled Spirit Bar on Elm Street. We require immediate backup. Repeat, officer threatening a federal agent. Shots are imminent." My voice, amplified by the adrenaline-fueled acoustics of the dead, silent bar, hung in the air like a physical object. For a split second, everyone froze. Miller's eyes widened, his wavering aim faltering as he tried to process what I'd just said. Davis, his finger tightening on the trigger, paused, a flicker of confusion crossing his rage-contorted face. Even Sal, the bartender, froze with his hand just inches from the shotgun under the bar. The words were a gamble, a desperate Hail Mary. I had no idea if Miller's radio was even on, let alone if dispatch would hear or understand the gravity of the call. But it was the only weapon I had left. I had turned their own system against them, broadcasting an officer in distress call that implicated them as the aggressors. Miller was the first to react. "What the hell are you talking about?" he stammered, his gaze darting from me to his partner. The seed of doubt, planted when he first saw our credentials, was now sprouting into a thorny vine of panic. He was a cop. He knew what a call like that meant. Every patrol car in a 5-mile radius would be converging on this location, lights and sirens screaming. And when they arrived, there would be questions. Hard questions. "He's lying," Davis roared, his focus snapping back to Marcus. The brief moment of hesitation was gone, replaced by a renewed sense of urgency. He knew he was running out of time. "He's trying to trick you, Miller." They're the criminals here. But my words had hit their mark. I could see it in Miller's posture. He lowered his weapon by a few crucial inches, no longer pointing it at my heart, but somewhere closer to my legs. It was a de-escalation, however small. He was thinking, and a thinking cop was less likely to start shooting. "Officer Miller," I said, keeping my tone firm and authoritative, speaking to him like a commanding officer, not a suspect. "Look at my face. Look at my brother's face. We are telling you the truth. Your partner has assaulted a federal agent and is now threatening another with a deadly weapon. You are seconds away from being an accessory to a federal crime that will end your career and put you in prison for a very, very long time. Is that what you want?" Every word was a chisel, chipping away at the foundation of his certainty. I saw his eyes flick down to our credentials, still lying on the floor where he'd dropped them. Black leather, gold badge. They suddenly looked a lot more real than they had a minute ago. "Shut up," Davis screamed. He was unraveling, the last threads of his composure snapping one by one. "You think you can talk your way out of this?" He took a step toward Marcus, shoving the muzzle of his gun closer. Marcus didn't flinch. He stood his ground, his eyes locked on Davis, two obsidian pools of pure, cold defiance. It was a battle of wills, and my brother wasn't going to be the first to break. The sound of distant sirens began to cut through the night. It started as a faint whine, barely audible, but it was growing louder with terrifying speed. My gamble had paid off. Dispatch had heard. Help was coming. But help was a double-edged sword. A swarm of cops, jacked up on adrenaline, responding to a call of officers threatened. They wouldn't be stopping to ask polite questions. They'd be coming in hard and fast, ready for a firefight. The sirens acted like a catalyst. Miller's face went pale. He knew exactly what was about to happen. A chaotic, violent storm was about to descend on this tiny bar, and he was standing at its epicenter. "Davis, put the gun down," Miller ordered, his voice no longer trembling but sharp with desperation. "That's an order. Put it down now." Davis ignored him. His entire world had shrunk to the space between his gun and Marcus's head. The sirens were a ticking clock, counting down the last seconds of his career, his freedom, his life as he knew it. He was a cornered animal, and he was about to lash out. "This is your fault," he snarled at Marcus, his voice a low, venomous whisper. "All your fault." I saw the subtle shift in his knuckles, the whitening of his grip. He was going to pull the trigger. I had no choice. "FBI, don't move!" I roared, and in the same instant I moved. I wasn't going for my gun. That was too slow, too risky. I dove, not at Davis, but at the small table next to me. With a sweep of my arm, I sent the table, 2 chairs, and a half-dozen empty beer bottles crashing towards Miller. It was a distraction, not an attack. Miller, startled, instinctively flinched back, momentarily breaking his line of sight. It was the only opening I would get. In that same fluid motion, I pivoted, my right hand finally going for the Sig Sauer Pituhud 29 holstered at my side. My body knew the movements, drilled into muscle memory through 1,000 hours on the range. Grip, draw, sight, fire. The sequence was as natural as breathing. But as my hand closed around the familiar checkered grip of my weapon, Marcus moved too. He hadn't waited for me. He had seen the same telltale signs in Davis's eyes. As Davis's finger began its final, fatal journey, Marcus exploded forward, not away from the gun, but into it. He drove his shoulder hard into Davis's chest, his left hand clamping down on the cop's wrist, forcing the gun's barrel up towards the ceiling. The world erupted in a deafening blast. The gunshot inside the confined space of the bar was a physical blow, a concussive wave of sound that vibrated through my bones. Plaster and dust rained down from the ceiling where the bullet had struck. The smell of cordite filled my nostrils, sharp and acrid. People screamed. Glass shattered somewhere behind me. I had my weapon out now, up in a 2-handed grip, sights trained on Davis. "Drop the weapon! Drop it now!" Marcus and Davis were locked in a desperate struggle. My brother, despite his strength, was at a disadvantage, fighting to control the direction of a gun held by a man determined to use it. Miller, recovering from my distraction, was yelling, his own gun now wavering between me, Marcus, and his out-of-control partner. The scene was pure chaos. 3 armed men in a deadly triangle, surrounded by screaming civilians. The sirens were deafening now, ending in a series of squealing tires right outside the front door. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows, painting the chaotic scene in strobing, hellish colors. "Police! Drop your weapons! Get on the ground!" The voice from the doorway was amplified by a bullhorn, impossibly loud and distorted. Suddenly the front door burst open, and the bar was flooded with uniformed bodies, shotguns and patrol rifles leveled, beams from tactical flashlights cutting through the dust-filled air and blinding us all. "Don't shoot!" I screamed, lowering my own weapon and placing it carefully on the floor, kicking it away. Federal agents. But in the noise, the chaos, and the strobing lights, all they saw were 2 black men, one of them struggling with a uniformed officer, and another armed man standing nearby. From their perspective, it was the worst-case scenario. An officer near the door, blinded by the tactical imperative, focused on the most immediate threat, the struggle. He leveled his rifle. "He's got the cop's gun," he shouted. I saw the rifle barrel swing towards my brother. They weren't going to ask questions. They were going to shoot. They were going to kill my brother right in front of my eyes. "No!" The word tore from my throat, a raw, primal scream of desperation. "He's FBI! Don't shoot!" Time seemed to warp, slowing to a thick, syrupy crawl. I saw the officer at the door brace himself, his cheek weld to the stock of his rifle. I saw the muscles in his jaw clench. I saw his finger begin to tighten on the trigger. In that fraction of a second, I saw my brother's life measured, weighed, and found wanting by a cop who saw only a threat. Not a man, not a brother, not a fellow officer of the law. Marcus was still locked in a life-or-death struggle with Davis. The discharged round had shocked Davis, but it hadn't broken him. If anything, the deafening roar of his own weapon had pushed him further over the edge. He was fighting with the wild, frenzied strength of a cornered animal, twisting and bucking, trying to bring the muzzle of the gun back down to bear on Marcus. The scene was a tangled knot of limbs and flashing lights. To the incoming officers, it was an officer in distress call made real. They saw a cop, their brother in blue, being grappled by a large man. They heard a gunshot. Their training, their instincts, their ingrained sense of solidarity all screamed one word: neutralize. I knew I had one last chance, one final, desperate move to avert the unthinkable. I couldn't reach them in time. I couldn't physically intervene. All I had were my words and the one thing that was supposed to cut through all the chaos: my authority. Ignoring the half-dozen guns now pointed in my direction, I ripped open my suit jacket. "FBI, I am Special Agent Johnson. Badge number 734. Stand down. That is a federal order." I bellowed the words with every ounce of air in my lungs. I projected my voice not just as a shout, but as a command. It was the voice I used in interrogation rooms, the voice that broke hardened criminals, the voice that established dominance and control in a crisis. It was a voice that demanded to be heard, to be obeyed. The officer with the rifle flinched. The command, spoken with such absolute authority, gave him a split second of pause. His finger eased off the trigger. It wasn't compliance, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall of his tactical certainty. He was hesitating, and hesitation was life. In that precious borrowed second, another figure pushed through the throng of uniforms at the door. He wasn't in patrol blues. He was older, with graying hair at his temples and the weary, stoic face of a man who had seen it all. He wore a rumpled suit and a detective's badge clipped to his belt. A sergeant. A supervisor. His eyes, sharp and practiced, scanned the chaotic tableau in an instant. He didn't just see the struggle. He saw the details the patrolman had missed. He saw my expensive suit and the weapon I had placed carefully on the floor. He saw Miller, the second cop, looking utterly lost and terrified, his gun pointing at nothing. He saw the high-quality leather credential wallets on the floor, and he heard my words echoing in the sudden, ringing silence after the gunshot. "Hold your fire!" the sergeant roared, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Everybody, hold!" He moved forward, stepping into the line of fire with a courage that bordered on insane. "You!" he barked, pointing at me. "On your knees! Hands on your head! Now!" It was an order I could obey. It showed he was taking control, not just reacting. I dropped to my knees immediately, lacing my fingers behind my head. It was humiliating. It was infuriating. But it was also progress. Kneeling was better than dead. "You," he shouted at Miller. "Holster your weapon and secure your partner. Get him under control." Miller, jolted out of his stupor, seemed to shrink in relief. He finally had a clear order to follow. He holstered his Glock and lunged toward the struggle. "Davis, it's over. Let it go," he yelled, grabbing his partner's arm. With Miller's help, Marcus finally managed to wrench the gun from Davis's hand. The moment he was disarmed, Davis seemed to collapse, all the fight draining out of him, replaced by a shuddering, gasping rage. Marcus shoved him away, and he stumbled back into the arms of two of the newly arrived officers, who immediately slammed him against a wall and cuffed him with brutal efficiency. Marcus stood there, chest heaving, his suit torn at the shoulder, a wild look in his eyes. Another officer immediately put a gun to his head. "On the ground, now!" "No!" the sergeant commanded. He turned his sharp gaze on my brother. "Son, I need you to put your hands up, nice and slow. Turn around and face me." Marcus, bleeding from a cut on his cheek, his breathing ragged, slowly raised his hands and turned. His eyes met mine across the room. I gave him a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Stay calm. We're almost there." The sergeant walked cautiously towards the bar, his eyes never leaving us. He bent down and picked up the two credential wallets from the floor. He opened mine first, his eyes scanning it under the beam of a flashlight. He looked from the picture to my face on the floor, then back to the ID. He did the same with Marcus's. He stood there for a long moment, the chaos of the bar swirling around him, cops securing the scene, patrons being herded out, radios crackling with traffic. In his hand, he held the truth, the key to this entire disaster. He let out a long, slow breath. It was the sound of a man watching a 10-car pileup happen in slow motion. He closed the wallets and slid them into his own jacket pocket. He finally keyed the mic on his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Sergeant Peters. We have the scene at the Kindled Spirit under control. Send a bus. We have multiple detainees." He paused, and his next words dropped like a bomb into the already charged atmosphere. "And notify the FBI field office. Tell them we have a situation involving two of their agents and two of ours." The moment he said it, the entire atmosphere shifted again. Cops who had been looking at us with suspicion and hostility now looked at us with a mixture of confusion, awe, and for a few, a dawning sense of absolute dread. We weren't the criminals anymore. We were the victims, and the perps were wearing the same uniform they were. The sergeant walked over to me. "You can get up, son," he said, his voice quiet, devoid of the earlier aggression. He looked me in the eye, and for the first time, I saw not a cop looking at a suspect, but a man looking at another man, and in his eyes, I saw a deep, profound weariness. "You have no idea," he sighed, shaking his head slowly, "what a goddamn mess this is." But as I slowly got to my feet, my knees aching, my heart still hammering against my ribs, a new cold feeling washed over me. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Davis and Miller were part of a precinct, a brotherhood, the thin blue line. We had crossed it. We had fought back. And as I looked at the hard, unreadable faces of the other officers in the room, I realized this wasn't the end of the nightmare. It was just the beginning. They had arrested their own, but the war had just been declared. The next hour was a surreal ballet of procedure and barely contained hostility. The Kindled Spirit, our former sanctuary, was now a full-blown crime scene, crawling with uniforms, detectives, and a forensics team, dusting for prints. Marcus and I were separated, which was standard procedure, but it felt like a tactical maneuver to weaken us. I was led to the back of an ambulance to have the small cut on my hand, a scrape from diving for the table, looked at by a paramedic who seemed deeply uncomfortable making eye contact with me. Through the open doors of the ambulance, I watched the scene unfold. I saw them lead Davis away in cuffs. He wasn't doing the perp walk of a shamed man. He was snarling, his face a thundercloud, his eyes scanning the crowd of his fellow officers like a king betrayed by his subjects. He wasn't cowed, he was recruiting. A few of the younger patrolmen wouldn't meet his gaze, but several of the older ones gave him short, almost imperceptible nods. It was a language I knew well, the silent communication of the tribe. "We've got your back." Miller was a different story. He sat on the bumper of a patrol car, head in his hands, looking like a man who had just watched his entire life burn down. Sergeant Peters stood over him, not berating him, but speaking in low, clipped tones. Miller was the weak link, the one who might break, and Peters was working him, trying to get ahead of the inevitable storm. Finally, a black sedan with government plates pulled up, and two familiar figures emerged. Assistant Special Agent in Charge Reynolds, our direct superior, and a woman I recognized as being from the Office of Professional Responsibility, the Bureau's version of Internal Affairs. Reynolds, a man whose resting expression was a barely controlled scowl, looked even more thunderous than usual. His eyes swept the scene, took in the flashing lights, the yellow tape, the local cops staring at him like he was an invading alien, and finally landed on me. He marched over, his expensive shoes crunching on bits of broken glass. "Johnson, report," he said, his voice a low growl that tolerated no preamble. I gave it to him, straight, factual, no emotion. The celebration, the arrival of Davis and Miller, the unprovoked demand for ID, the accusation, the escalation, the assault, the gunshot. I detailed every action, every word, as precisely as I could recall. When I was done, a tense silence hung between us. "And your brother," Reynolds asked, contained himself with remarkable restraint until the point of unlawful physical contact, I said, using the precise, sterile language of our reports. His actions were a textbook defensive response to an unprovoked assault. Reynolds grunted. "Textbook or not, he put his hands on a uniformed officer. The local union will have a field day with that." He looked over at the OPR agent, a stern-looking woman named Clark. "You get their weapons?" "Both secured and in my possession," Clark said, "along with their credentials." "Good," Reynolds said. He turned back to me. "You and your brother are on administrative leave, effective immediately. You'll be debriefed tonight, again tomorrow, and every day after that until OPR is satisfied. You will have no contact with the press. You will have no contact with the local PD. You will, in fact, have no contact with anyone about this case but me, Agent Clark, or a Bureau-approved lawyer. Am I understood?" "Crystal clear, sir," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. We had been the victims of a crime, nearly murdered by a uniformed officer, and the first thing that happened was that we were being benched. I understood the procedure, the necessity of it, but it still felt like a slap in the face. They took us back to the field office in separate cars. The debriefing was brutal. We sat in a sterile, windowless room, the same kind of room where we broke down suspects and told our stories over and over again. Clark's questions were relentless, probing every detail, every decision. "Why didn't you announce yourselves as federal agents sooner? Why did you allow the situation to escalate?" "Agent Johnson," she said to Marcus, "at what point did you decide that physical force was your only option? It wasn't an interrogation of a victim. It was the interrogation of a potential liability. They were looking for any mistake we might have made, any deviation from protocol that they could use to mitigate the political and legal fallout. They were protecting the Bureau, protecting themselves. It was nearly dawn when they finally let us go, with strict orders to go home and stay there. Marcus and I rode the elevator down in silence, the weight of the night pressing down on us. When we got to the parking garage, we stopped by our cars, the gray morning light filtering through the concrete slats. "Admin leave," Marcus said, the words dripping with disgust. He kicked at the tire of his car. "We get assaulted, almost get shot, and we're the ones on the sidelines." "It's protocol, Mark. You know that," I said, though the words offered little comfort. "To hell with protocol," he shot back, his voice raw. "You saw them, Mike. You saw the looks on those cops' faces at the bar. You think this ends with Davis and Miller getting a slap on the wrist? This is a declaration of war. That Sergeant Peters, he knows it. Reynolds knows it. That's why they're putting us in a box. They're afraid." He was right. I had seen the looks, the cold, hard stares, the way the blue line had solidified around their own, even when their own were so clearly in the wrong. Davis and Miller weren't just two bad cops anymore. They were symbols. To their precinct, they were two brothers being targeted by the feds, us against them. They'll try to bury this, Marcus continued, pacing now. The department will leak a counter-narrative. Two aggressive, unidentified men assaulted officers, forcing them to draw their weapons. They'll leave out the FBI part, or they'll claim they thought our credentials were fake. They'll paint Davis as the hero who took down two dangerous impersonators. They'll drag our names through the mud, Mike. They'll go after our records, our families, anything they can find. I knew he was right. It was a playbook as old as policing itself. Circle the wagons, control the narrative, and protect your own at all costs. We weren't just two agents anymore. We were a threat to an entire institution. So what do? I asked, the question hanging heavy in the empty garage. We follow orders. We sit at home and let OPR and the lawyers handle it. Marcus stopped pacing and looked at me, and for the first time I saw something in his eyes I'd rarely seen before. Fear. Not for himself, but for what was coming. No, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. That's how we lose. They're going to use the system to crush us, so we have to use the system to fight back. What are you talking about? He walked over to his car and opened the trunk. He moved a gym bag and lifted a section of the floor, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a sleek black laptop and a set of encrypted hard drives. It was our personal investigative toolkit, the one we used for side projects, the one that was completely off the Bureau's grid. He pulled out the laptop. They think we're just two grunts. They don't know who they're dealing with. They don't know what we're capable of, what we know how to do. He looked at me, his eyes burning with a new, terrifying intensity. Before we were FBI agents, we were analysts. We were hunters. We know how to dig. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. I knew what he was suggesting. Mark, no, we can't. We'd be violating a direct order. Reynolds would have our badges, our careers. What careers? He scoffed. If we let them control this, our careers are already over. They'll make sure of it. This isn't about our jobs anymore, Mike. This is about our lives. They tried to kill us. I'm not going to sit around and wait for them to finish the job. He slammed the trunk shut. I'm going to find every piece of dirt on Officer Davis and Officer Miller. I'm going to look at every complaint, every use of force report, every partner they've ever had. I'm going to build a file so toxic it'll burn their entire department to the ground. He paused, his gaze locking with mine, challenging me. The only question is, are you with me? Are you with me? The question echoed in the cavernous silence of the parking garage, a simple query that held the weight of our entire future. On one side was the Bureau, procedure, the career we had sacrificed everything to build. On the other was my brother, his face a mask of grim determination, holding a laptop that represented a complete betrayal of that career. It was a choice between the system that was failing to protect us and a rogue path into darkness. My training screamed at me to say no, to take that laptop, march back upstairs, and hand it to Reynolds. Following orders was the bedrock of our profession. But my gut, my instincts, the part of me that had seen the hate in Davis's eyes and the fear in Miller's, knew that Marcus was right. They weren't just coming for our jobs. They were coming for us. The system wasn't designed to protect two black FBI agents from two white local cops. It was designed to protect itself, and we were a messy, inconvenient complication. I looked at my brother, at the fierce, protective loyalty burning in his eyes, the same look he'd had when he'd pulled me out of the wreckage of my first car crash, the same look he'd had when he stood up to the bullies in our high school. He had always been the one to charge forward. I had always been the one to watch his back. They'll be watching us, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Our phones, our financials, our bureau computers. They'll expect us to make a move. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Marcus's face. Let them watch. They're looking for agents. They won't be looking for the two ghosts we're about to become. He was right. We had spent years at the Bureau learning not just how to build a case, but how to become invisible, how to move through the digital world without leaving a trace, how to gather information from sources that officially didn't exist. We were about to turn all that training, all that knowledge, against another branch of law enforcement, It felt like treason. It felt like survival. Okay, I said, the word feeling both momentous and terrifying. I'm in. But we do this my way. Clean. Untraceable. We don't use our own networks. Not even for a second. We use burners, public Wi-Fi, dead drops. We become the kind of targets we used to hunt. The smile on his face widened. I knew you'd see it. The next few days were a blur of calculated paranoia. We went home to our separate apartments and acted like two agents on forced vacation. We ordered food, watched TV, and answered the twice-daily check-in calls from Agent Clark with monosyllabic, cooperative grunts. We were perfect models of compliance, but the moment the sun went down, we became different people. We'd leave our official phones at home, take separate, rambling routes to a series of anonymous coffee shops and late-night diners, always sitting with our backs to the wall, our faces obscured by shadows. Marcus, with his savant-like skill for data mining, dove into the digital abyss. I, with my background in human intelligence, started working the whispers and rumors. Marcus set up a triple-encrypted, anonymous server routed through 6 different countries. From there, he began to slice his way into the city's municipal databases. It started with the basics, personnel files for Davis and Miller. What we found was both shocking and sickeningly predictable. Officer Alan Davis, 32 years old, 6 years on the force, and in those 6 years, a staggering 14 excessive force complaints, 12 of them against minority suspects. Every single one had been investigated by his own department's internal affairs and dismissed as unfounded or within department guidelines. 2 of the complaints had resulted in civil lawsuits that the city had settled out of court with a non-disclosure agreement. He was a lawsuit waiting to happen, a powder keg with a badge, and his department had not only failed to stop him, they had actively protected him. Officer Frank Miller, 54 years old, 28 years on the force, a year away from a full pension. His record was cleaner on the surface, but a different kind of rot was visible if you looked closely. He'd had 5 different partners in the last 3 years, an unusually high turnover rate. He was a follower, a man who went along to get along, content to ride out his last year without making waves. He was the good cop who stood by and watched the bad cop break the law, which in many ways made him even more dangerous than Davis. He was the silent consent that allowed the cancer to spread. "This isn't enough," Marcus muttered one night, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating his frustrated face. We were huddled in a booth at a 24-hour greasy spoon that smelled of stale coffee and regret. Complaints get dismissed all the time. A decent lawyer will paint Davis as a proactive cop working in a tough neighborhood. We need more. We need something they can't bury. He was right. We needed a smoking gun. That's when I decided to make a call. I used a fresh burner phone, bouncing the signal off 3 different towers before it connected. The voice on the other end was gravelly, cautious. "Yeah? It's Mike. I need a favor." The man on the other end, Sully, was a retired detective, a relic from the old guard who had been my first mentor when I was a rookie beat cop, long before I ever dreamed of the FBI. He'd taught me how to read a crime scene, how to talk to people, and most importantly, how to tell when the system was lying. He'd retired in disgust 5 years ago, but he still had ears all over the department. I didn't give him details. I didn't have to. The story of the bar shootout was already the stuff of legend and rumor in every precinct in the city. "I hear you boys stepped in it," Sully said, a hint of dark amusement in his voice. "We stepped in something," I replied. "I need to know about Alan Davis, not the official story. I need the locker room story. The things that never make it into a report." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "You're asking me to stick my neck out for you, kid. The blue wall is thicker than ever these days. They're circling the wagons around that punk." "Sully, they tried to kill us," I said, my voice low and intense. "This isn't about a case anymore. This is about survival." He sighed, a sound heavy with the weariness of 1,000 ugly truths. "All right, I'll ask around. But you didn't get it from me. I'll leave a package for you. Old spot. Be there tomorrow at midnight. Come alone." The line went dead. The old spot was a hollowed-out book, a tattered copy of Moby Dick on the bottom shelf of a dusty, forgotten corner of the city's main public library. The next night, I went. The library was dark and silent, and I moved through the stacks like a ghost. I found the book, my heart pounding in my chest. It felt heavier than it should. I didn't open it there. I took it back to our temporary command center, a cheap motel room rented with cash. Marcus was there, his eyes red-rimmed from staring at code for 18 hours straight. I placed the book on the flimsy table between the two beds. "Did you get it?" he asked. "I think so," I said. I opened the cover. Tucked inside wasn't a file or a document. It was a small black USB flash drive. No label, no markings, an anonymous little piece of plastic that could hold anything from our salvation to our doom. Marcus took it from me, his movements reverent. He plugged it into a sanitized, air-gapped laptop one that had never been and would never be connected to the internet. He ran 3 different antivirus and malware sweeps before he even attempted to open the drive. Finally, he clicked open. There was only one file on it. It was a video. The file name was just a string of numbers. A case number. He double-clicked. The video flickered to life. It was bodycam footage, grainy and shaky, the audio distorted. The timestamp in the corner was from 3 years ago. The officer wearing the camera was breathing heavily, running. He was chasing someone down a dark alleyway. "Stop, police!" a familiar voice shouted, breathless. It was a younger Officer Miller. Suddenly, another figure burst into the frame from the side, tackling the running suspect. It was Officer Davis. He slammed the suspect, a young Hispanic kid who couldn't have been more than 18, against a brick wall. What happened next made the blood in my veins run cold. The suspect was on the ground, clearly surrendering, his hands up. He was terrified. Davis stood over him, screaming obscenities, and then he began to kick him. Hard, brutal, methodical kicks to the ribs and the head. The sound was sickening, a series of wet thuds mixed with the boy's cries of pain. And the whole time, Miller just stood there. His body cam was pointed right at the assault, capturing every horrific second. He didn't intervene. He didn't say a word. He just watched. The video ended abruptly. Marcus and I sat there in the cheap motel room, the silence deafening. This was it. The smoking gun. An unedited video of a brutal assault with a clear cover-up by his partner. This wasn't a complaint that could be dismissed. This was a felony. This was the kind of thing that destroyed careers, ended pensions, and sent cops to prison. "We've got him," Marcus whispered, his voice hoarse. "We've got them both." I nodded, a cold sense of victory washing over me. "We leak this to the press. It'll be a firestorm. The department won't be able to cover this up." But as Marcus reached for the drive, planning to upload it to our anonymous server and send it to a journalist we trusted, a thought struck me, a cold and terrifying premonition. "Wait," I said, grabbing his arm. "What is it?" "Sully," I said, my mind racing. "He's old school. He hates cops like Davis, but he's also loyal to the badge in his own way. Why would he just hand this over to us? Why would he risk everything to give us the one piece of evidence that could burn it all down?" I looked at the file name again. The string of numbers. A case number. "It's a trap," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. "This video, it's not a secret. It's bait." Marcus looked at me, confused. "What are you talking about? It's body cam footage." "Exactly," I said, my voice rising. "It's official evidence. It's from a real case, which means it's in an official evidence locker somewhere. They know this video exists, and if Sully could get it, it means they let him. They're daring us to use it." I grabbed my own laptop and my hands flew across the keyboard, my mind making connections with terrifying speed. If we leak this, what happens? They'll have to investigate the leak. And who are the prime suspects? The 2 pissed-off FBI agents with a grudge against the officers in the video. They'll get a warrant and they'll tear our lives apart looking for the source. They don't even have to find it. The accusation alone, that we hacked into a police evidence database and stole a file, it would be enough to destroy us. Our careers, our credibility, everything. Davis and Miller might go down, but they'll take us with them. The flash drive on the table no longer looked like our salvation. It looked like a poison pill, a perfectly designed trap, and we had walked right into it. They hadn't just circled the wagons. They had laid an ambush, and the jaws of the trap were about to snap shut. The cheap motel room, which moments ago had felt like a war room on the verge of victory, suddenly felt like a cage. The flash drive on the table pulsed with a malevolent energy, a Trojan horse delivered by a man I thought I could trust. Sully hadn't been helping us. He had been using us. Or more likely, he himself was a pawn, used by Sergeant Peters, or someone even higher up in the department to pass us the bait. They knew we were too good, too professional to make a stupid mistake, so they gave us a weapon that would blow up in our own hands. "So we can't use it," Marcus said, the hope in his voice deflating like a punctured lung. "We have the proof that could exonerate us and nail them to the wall, and we can't use it." "No," I said, a new cold clarity settling over me. The initial shock was fading, replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated anger. They had underestimated us. They thought they could outwit us, that we'd fall for a simple honeypot. They saw us as predictable. That was their mistake. We don't use it the way they expect us to use it. I started pacing the small room, the threadbare carpet worn smooth by 1,000 anxious feet. My mind was racing, connecting the dots, seeing the trap not as an obstacle but as an opportunity. They want us to leak it. They're waiting for it to appear on the 10 o'clock news so they can pounce. They have a warrant already drafted. I'd bet my badge on it. They're monitoring the servers of every major news outlet in the city. The moment that file uploads, they'll have the IP address, and even with our precautions, they'd have a starting point. It would be a war of attrition, and we'd lose. "So what's the alternative?" Marcus asked, leaning forward, catching the shift in my energy. "We don't go to the press," I said, a slow predatory smile forming on my face. "We don't go to the U.S. attorney. We don't go to our own superiors. They're all part of the system, a system that is now actively working against us. We go somewhere else. We go to the one person they would never expect." An hour later, I was sitting in a different kind of sterile room. Not a police station or a federal building, but the corner office of one of the city's most powerful civil rights attorneys, a woman named Isabella Rossi. She was legendary, a shark in a designer suit who had made her career suing corrupt police departments into submission. She had more sources inside the local PD than the DA's office did, and she despised dirty cops with a passion that was almost religious. I had gotten the meeting by using my real name. The moment her assistant heard Special Agent Johnson, the doors had swung open. Rossi sat across from me at a large mahogany desk, her expression sharp, intelligent, and deeply skeptical. Marcus was waiting in the car. This was a meeting that had to be handled with finesse, not force. "Agent Johnson," she said, her voice smooth but laced with steel. "My office has been following your situation with great interest. The official police report is a work of fiction. I'm curious to hear your version." I didn't tell her our version. I didn't give her a single detail about what happened in the bar. She didn't need my story. She needed leverage. "Ms. Rossi," I began, my voice calm and steady, "what I'm about to tell you is not for attribution. It is not, at this moment, actionable intelligence. It is a professional courtesy. Consider it a tip from a concerned citizen." I slid a simple piece of paper across the desk. On it I had written just one thing, the case number from the video file. She picked it up, her perfectly manicured eyebrows raising a fraction of an inch. She swiveled in her chair to her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She had access to court and police databases that made our off-the-grid methods look like child's play. I saw her eyes scan the screen, and I saw the moment she found it. A small, satisfied smile touched the corner of her lips. "An assault case from 3 years ago," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "Suspect, a juvenile named Ricardo Diaz. Charges were assault on a police officer. Funny the charges were dropped a week later. Sealed juvenile record. But the evidence file, it's still active. Body camera footage logged by one Officer Frank Miller." She looked up at me, her sharp eyes boring into mine. "This is a very interesting case number to be giving me. What aren't you telling me, Agent Johnson?" "I'm not telling you anything," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I'm simply suggesting that a brilliant attorney such as yourself, who happens to be representing Mr. Diaz's family in an unrelated civil matter, might find it beneficial to file a discovery motion for all evidence related to his prior arrests, especially evidence that was never presented in his original case. Rossi's smile widened. She understood immediately. I wasn't leaking the video. I was giving her a perfectly legal, procedurally sound roadmap to get the video herself. Once she filed the motion, the city attorney would be legally obligated to turn it over. If they refused, they'd be in contempt of court. If they claimed the video was lost or destroyed, it would be an admission of evidence tampering a felony. The trap they had set for us was based on the illegality of us possessing the footage, but if Rossi obtained it through legal discovery, it was pristine. It was admissible. It was a nuke. And why would I do this, she asked, testing me. Because the video shows Officers Davis and Miller committing a felony assault and cover-up, because it's the key to winning your current case against the city. And because when that video becomes public, it will make the events that transpired at the Kindled Spirit last Friday make a whole lot more sense to a grand jury, I said. It establishes a pattern of violent criminal behavior for Officer Davis and a pattern of complicity for Officer Miller. It turns them from rogue cops into a racketeering enterprise. I stood up. As I said, Miss Rossi, a professional courtesy. I walked out of her office without another word. The ball was in her court. We didn't have to wait long. The next morning, Isabella Rossi filed an emergency motion in federal court. The city's lawyers tried to block it, citing a dozen different procedural excuses. But the judge, a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for holding the city's feet to the fire, approved the motion. The city had 24 hours to produce the evidence. The department was caught. They had laid a trap for us, and in doing so, had left the evidence out where someone else could find it. They never imagined we would find a way to weaponize their own legal system against them. 24 hours later, the video was in Rossi's hands, and 2 hours after that, it was the lead story on every news channel in the state. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The video was irrefutable. Public outrage was a tidal wave. The mayor, the police chief, the district attorney, they all held emergency press conferences, promising full, transparent investigations. Sergeant Peters was the first to fall, suspended for his role in the subsequent cover-up. Miller, facing the loss of his pension and a long prison sentence, broke completely. He gave a full confession, not only about the assault in the video, but about everything that happened at the bar. He detailed how Davis had targeted us, how he had instigated the entire event, and how he had lied on his official report. He admitted that they both knew our FBI credentials were real. Davis was finished. He was fired, arrested, and charged with multiple counts of assault, perjury, and violation of civil rights. His own union, seeing the toxic, unwinnable nature of his case, publicly withdrew their support. The blue wall had crumbled. For Marcus and me, the vindication was swift. The U.S. Attorney's Office convened a federal grand jury. With Miller's testimony and the video, we were cleared of any wrongdoing. The administrative leave was lifted, and we received a formal apology from the director of the FBI himself. We walked back into the field office a week later, and it was like walking through the parting of the Red Sea. The whispers stopped. The sideways glances were replaced with looks of respect, and in some cases, awe. We hadn't just survived. We had won. That Friday, we went back to the Kindled Spirit. Sal, the old bartender, was behind the counter. The bar was quiet. He saw us walk in, and a slow grin spread across his grizzled face. "First one's on the house, boys," he said, already pouring 2 glasses of the good scotch. We sat down in our usual spots. The wood of the bar was still slightly scarred where Davis's head had hit it. A battle scar. A reminder. Marcus raised his glass. "To winning," he said, his voice quiet, without the bravado of the week before. It was a more somber, more meaningful toast. "No," I said, clinking my glass against his. The smoky aroma of the scotch filled the air. "To justice." We had faced down a corrupt system, not with our guns, but with our wits. We had been tested, pushed to the brink, and had emerged stronger. The Donovan case had been a victory for the Bureau. This, however, was a victory for us, and it tasted infinitely sweeter